Today, I'm joined by Chris Ortega, who leads technology transformation at Lake Michigan Credit Union. What's distinct about Chris's approach is that he's rebuilt how the organization operates before deploying the tools. Agile teams, a center of excellence, and a single committee governing AI, stablecoin, and whatever comes next. That's a fundamentally different bet than most institutions are making, and we're going to walk through exactly how he's making it work. Chris, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks, Ankur, for having me here.
What did the technology landscape look like when you arrived at the credit union? And what was your initial game plan?
So, when I first got there, I think this happens in a lot of organizations. It's a typical environment with a help desk and infrastructure and development team. And when I looked at the landscape, what I was really looking for was a stabilization, modernizing the architecture, reducing single points of failure, creating more resiliency, improving also visibility into our systems. The IT team wasn't very used to exposing what was going on inside the IT team, and we wanted to build trust with the rest of the business units, and so we wanted to become more transparent. And so it was a big focus on changing the mindset through the agile transformations, being more open, and then a structural physical change in how the architecture was set up.
Could you give us a sense of the size and scale of the business, Lake Michigan Credit Union? And because I want to just paint the picture for our audience as to, what year it was, roughly what year it was when you landed, what's the scale and size of Lake Michigan Credit Union? And the reason why I ask is because, I think a lot of technology leaders want to do exactly what you've done and are doing. But the challenge is they always wonder, how do they get enough conviction, enough of a catalyst built to go and really enact a bigger transformation exercise, right? Because usually you're making adjustments maybe on the margins. It's a little bit more playing it safe. That's what we typically see in the financial services space. So I'm curious if you could just paint that picture for us, what it looked like when you first came on board.
Well, Lake Michigan Credit Union is a $17 billion asset organization. They're 13th largest in the nation as far as credit unions go, the largest in Michigan, and we have branches in Michigan and in Florida. And so it's a very sizable credit union, a lot bigger than a lot of the other ones that are out there. And so I was given more flexibility just because the investment could be made there. However, that doesn't stop any credit union, no matter what their size or community bank, to be able to do their own transformation, especially when you're talking about agile transformation, process improvement, things like that. And that in and of itself can be a game changer for a lot of places.
When you came on board, did you have conviction from the rest of the leadership team, the board, right, to undergo and enact this plan, or did you have to build conviction and buy-in?
I think it was a combination of both. I think that the board and our CEO, they knew that we had to modernize. They knew that that we needed to transform the people because technology doesn't transform until people do. And so they knew that on the one hand that there had to be a ultimate change in how we do things. On the other hand, it's a lot of uncertainty, right? How are those things going to go, especially when we're talking about a fundamental change, in the organization in which they have to look at things in a more enterprise level opposed to a smaller. And Lake Michigan Credit Union grew really, really fast. And I think typically what happens with an organization grows that quickly, they get the business, they get the revenue, but then they forget about the technology. And I don't think this is on purpose. I think they forget about the technology until things start breaking and not doing well, right? And so I think there was a realization that in order for Lake Michigan Credit Union to achieve even the further goals, that they needed to have the outlook of what got us here isn't going to get us there. And so it was a big, it was a big mind shift. And so finding the person who had that broad skill set and experience with agile and project management process and improvements there was really detrimental.
Mhm. Now, I think there are multiple technology inflection points over the years. And so I think there's this question of like the present state and the future state that potentially could basically pave the way for, right? But in an organization where it's highly regulated, there's a high degree of sensitivity in terms of the ways that you work, right? Like make lending decisions and handle accounts and very sensitive PII and such. How do you set up an organization like that for success in the sense of you have businesses as usual operations you have to keep afloat, but you also have to digest and adopt and experiment and incorporate newer ways of working through newer technologies. And we've seen a lot over the years, right? I mean, you could talk about like big data and data science and data engineering and machine learning, all the way to AI. Crypto is another one. Stablecoin, of course, is huge. It might be quantum down the line, but we don't need to go through all the technologies. But I'm just curious, what is your playbook for paving the current way to the future state?
So we did establish a center of excellence, and that center of excellence is designed to be able to not only go into the business units to help them look at how their processes are, but also to redefine how they look at things, what are the pain points, what kind of new technologies can we bring in. And so what's also a part of that center of excellence is an emerging technology governance board in which they look at new technologies that are coming in, and then we decide, well, this may fit in some of these processes that we have. And so that is one way for us to be able to bring us all together as one team, to be able to work together and then also implement those new technologies. And so we're constantly improving ourselves, and we do this through what we call our 3 C's of collaborative, hard, serious minds, and continuous excellence. And so we use this very simple concept to start with, to say, okay, let's come together as a team, and then let's look at how we can put these new technologies in place to be able to advance what's going on within the credit union.
What has surprised you most with regards to emerging technologies impacting financial institutions today?
I think what surprises me the most is how much is out there.
Hmm.
So one of the things that this was like about a year and a half ago. In our senior leadership team, we had to get together to do some research using the pestle model, and one of the things was technology. And so my homework, so to speak, was to find out what were the new emerging technologies that were coming that would apply to credit unions or to financial institutions. And I thought, oh, this is going to be easy. I keep up with this stuff all the time, right? And so what ended up happening was I was doing the research. I even used AI to help me out. And on the one hand, there was stuff that was there that I knew. I was like, okay, yeah, I know about this stuff. I've read about it. I'm familiar with it. I know it's coming. Then there were things that were like, yeah, I've heard of that stuff. Not, I here and there. I don't know too much about it. But then there was this whole subsection of stuff that was about new emerging technology I'd never even heard of. I mean, never even knew they existed. And so they're coming down the pipe, and it's affecting, all these financial institutions. So now we have to figure out what's the best way to bring this in and be able to apply it to our organization in a way that supports our members, that gives them, a way to be able to, bank with us in the most highly experienced, intuitive and experiential way.
I think it's a very interesting point because you are right. There's so much new emerging technology, and it's happening concurrently, right? It's not like one wave after another. There are multiple waves. Some might basically come at us a little bit more quickly or have a bigger, bigger like magnitude of a wave, but they're happening simultaneously. And I'm curious, like from your perspective, obviously agile has been a big mainstay for you. I'm just curious, where does traditional project management fall short, and what does agile actually look like within a credit union?
Yeah, so traditional project management, I feel that again, this is my opinion. This is falls short because I think it was built for a world that really no longer exists. I mean, it assumes predictability, linearity, longer planning cycles. Today's technology landscape is nonlinear. It's fast moving. It's deeply interconnected, and so by the time a traditional project plan is written, the environment has already shifted. And so all that planning that gets done in the beginning, and we're looking to implement value, gets lost because we're trying to have everything at once. But inside a credit union, for instance, that gap becomes even more visible because there's member expectations that change quickly, regulatory landscapes evolve, emerging technologies like AI, RPA, stablecoin. They don't wait for a water plan to catch up. So, I'm not saying that water plan doesn't have its place. Sometimes it does. That's why we need our project managers to be familiar with different tools within their toolbox in order to adapt and make sure that we're making the right decisions in how we execute.
Yeah, I think it is very interesting to see how teams and organizations are operating differently, because the pace at which you could move is a lot faster, right? And at the same time, I think user expectations are changing and adapting a lot more quickly. And so when you have these very long planning cycles, which is how things used to work 10, 15 years ago, right? You'd plan out months, years ahead, and you would go through that exercise. You kind of knew what you were going to build that quarter, that month, that year.
Hmm.
And we do have some of that still, but it's a lot more fluid, right? Like I just think, like, if you asked the average technologist at a credit union what their plan for agentic AI was 18 months ago, the first thing they would have asked is like, what is agentic AI? And
Exactly.
and 12 months ago, they're like, no, 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 this is like what programmers do, right? Like I can't imagine it applying to a non-programming setting. That's agents for coding. Even 6 months ago, right? I think call it pre OpenClaw, maybe post Opus 4.6, maybe they would have said, hey, it's still coding. Like I don't get it. And then you fast forward to May of 2026, June of 2026, this sort of time frame that we're approaching here. It's very clear that agentic AI is not just a coding technology, as most people have thought about it past year. It's changed quite a lot, right? And so I think you do need more fluid planning and execution cycles. And I think all of us are trying to figure out, hey, what does that look like, right? Down to even what do individuals do? So, I'll just give you an example here. Like on our side, engineers are wearing more design and product hats, and product people are wearing more engineering hats. And so I think this is like goes to your point. You have to be a lot more flexible and fluid as to how you plan and execute. And agile is one really great way to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the flip side of that too, you know, um, developers are getting or starting to get so good with AI and writing code that they're able to interface with customers and business units and be able to write code a lot quicker than they were before, which kind of forces them in that position of, hey, let's hear what you want to do because I can get that done fairly quickly rather than, having to, do this, implement this crazy design document and do all this talking where AI can actually be a partner with you in that and there's more interaction. I just think you're going to see more and more of that, coming up.
I'd love to turn our attention to Lake Michigan's approach to having a single emerging technologies committee. I'm curious how that prevents silos or chaos that you may have seen elsewhere. And what was the real thought process behind that?
The idea behind it is that, we wanted to be able to have one intake method, one prioritization model, one risk lens, one ethical framework, one roadmap, because when you have all of these different emerging technologies committees, and I will tell you, I've already ran into this where I was talking to another banking institution where they had exactly that. For all their emerging technologies, they had different committees and
Hmm.
they found it difficult to, well, who owns what's overlapping, and how do we get these things done when we know that there are different emerging technologies that have cross reference, I would say, to each other. You know what I'm saying? And so the thinking behind it was that most organizations adopt emerging technology, they do it in pockets. So AI over here, RPA over there, data governance somewhere else, stablecoin being explored by a completely different group. Then fragmentation creates that chaos, right? So you get duplicated spend, conflicting priorities, shadow IT, and a risk posture that's just impossible to manage. So we went the opposite direction. We want a more coherent approach. And I will tell you that the some of the institutions I've talked to, some of the credit unions, they're like, we're going to do that. we That is a great idea because they are facing those same specific problems, those same specific things that I just laid out.
And what does that committee own in terms of decisions or outcomes that they are attached to, right? Because I suppose like the challenge is they may do the planning and the design, and there might be a lot more to it than that, of course, like budgeting and assigning who does the execution and such. But how do you tie the ideas and the concepts and the decisions that they make to the actual execution and the ROI that's happening on the ground, so there's connective tissue between the planning phase and the execution phase, and ultimately assessing whether you achieve the outcomes that you thought you'd achieve with the initial experiments and then adoption of the technologies that you introduce.
Yeah, so we have a solutions architect group, and that solutions architect group is also very knowledgeable in these things, these not just the emerging technologies, but current, and they help in order to see where these things can apply. So there's this partnership between the solutions architecture group, the COE, and even the operations side and risk to be able to say, okay, here's how we can apply this, and all the respective groups kind of work together. Now, our methodology, and we're developing this more and more, is creating these Scrum groups where it's not just technical people who are running a Scrum team or a Scrumish team, as I like to call it, but they're incorporating some of the business units within that Scrum team or the solutions architect to be able to have these kinds of conversations and do the implementation as to where we're going forward from a project standpoint, and then of course release.
That makes a lot of sense. Is that the initial planning is cross-functional, cross-department. Then you have the solutions architects and that team really get down to how does this get done, and then you have the Scrum teams basically go and carry out the execution, right? And so it feels like there's good lineage across the entire organization that way.
Yeah, and then everything's laid out in our roadmaps because we have a group called Enterprise Agility that takes all the work that's being done, lays it out in a roadmap. There's project management that's happening when they're in this execution, so that we know which teams are working on, like which people are working on what Scrum teams, and how that they're working together, what dependencies are happening, and so it's highly coordinated. We have a project steering committee that helps to be able to prioritize all that work.
I am curious about what I call like the technical overhang that we see in the space with the AI as an example. So, in the recent weeks, OpenAI and Anthropic have partnered with major private equity groups to basically almost start another part of their business, this forward deployed part of their business, and the whole premise is that the models themselves introduce incredible technical capabilities, but the actual implementation of the technical capabilities do require for deployed engineers, as an example, basically a team to go and translate the capabilities that the model has into real complex business settings where you have to worry about things like integration and user experiences and how does data flow and how do you train the models and how do you have responsible AI and all of these things? I suppose from your premise, what are your learnings having started to work with some of these technologies? Is there a really big need to have a concerted effort where business and technical teams to come together to take what's coming down the pipe from, let's say, the model labs around AI to actually implement different ways of working with things like agents and such?
So we have an intelligent automations group that helps to be able to organize our methods and approach for using, let's say, agentic AI, and how we're going to use automation and RPA in, because I would say that that is our best way to be able to put control on the LLMs and stuff. I'm trying to make that stuff somewhat apart from the people who are on the business level, because I don't want to get in the weeds on, what an LLM works, and all that. I want them to be more focused on what that agentic AI can do for them and how they can utilize it. And so, those are some of the things on the back end that we use our implementation partners for, to be able to handle some of those challenges, I'd say, with the LLMs. Like for hallucinogenic behavior, one of the things that we're very, very on top of is, making sure that we understand how the AI is able to come up with its responses, its recommendations, even its conclusions, to say, are we getting the right responses? We do our testing, we do our due diligence to make sure that we understand exactly what the how that recommendation came about. What was its reasoning in coming up with its recommendation, so that we can trace it back. And if there is any hallucinogenic behavior, we can fix that. And that's something we'd rather just take from the business and say, okay, it's not doing something right. Okay, where is it not doing something right? And then we can go and fix that hallucinogenic behavior if it's retraining or updating the LLM. So
Yeah. I think it's a really good call out that business and technical teams need to work together, because the technical teams understand technically how the models work and such, but they don't know where the gaps are, right? That the business teams are experiencing, and so you need business to convey, hey, look. From a business perspective, here are things that I need, or here are things that are not working well, or this doesn't quite make sense. And then the technical teams are able to then diagnose and say, oh, okay, I see what you're trying to accomplish now. I see your frame and view of the world. I'm going to go back to the lab and go tinker with a couple of things that I know I can control, and then come back to you and then have you retest again.
yep, absolutely. And that's actually been very successful with us too, because some of our fraud disputes area, in which we put some automation in, have required us to do exactly that. They're saying, well, it doesn't work here, it doesn't work here, and then we go back and we analyze and say, okay, let's see if we can update what's going on, with that automation, so that we can fix it and then take it back to them, and then they can run it again. And so it's a very good back and forth, by the way. I mean, and that's the kind of thing that just builds team trust, and and team camaraderie and collaboration. So, and I think that's what's so cool about the
Yeah.
technology that's coming these days, is that it really is bringing out more collaboration. You know, if you allow it to, right? I mean, if you look at it that way, it gives you that dynamic where you can have these scrum teams, you can have these scrum pods that have this kind of interaction in which there's empathy on both sides, right? They're learning what the business sees and what their reactions are. But at the same time, there's the businesses are seeing, well, this is kind of how the sausage is made, and yeah, I get it. It's tough stuff.
Fully agree. I think that this is a really fun time if you let it be fun, in the sense that you have to be open to learning new things and reworking how you work, and basically reframing the your role in some ways. But I think it's bringing teams together, so you see more cross-functional, cross-departmental activity, and it requires like business and technology teams to work hand in hand. Whereas I remember back in the day, business would do their business functions. They would only call on technology if they ran into issues. The technology team had some sort of bigger, broader mandate, but they would be pretty siloed, even physically siloed. Back in the day, that where everyone was in the offices. But they would be on a separate floor, separate department, separate building. It was
Yeah.
very isolated. Now I think you're seeing especially the teams that work in person. But again, if you do hybrid or remote, same philosophy applies, is that they're in more of the same physical or digital space, right? More meetings together, because they need to pair nicely in order to achieve the outcomes, right? And I think that is a really, really fun outcome of just how this new technology works here.
And I think that actually, this is where I think where a lot of people think remote there's a lot of criticism on remote teams. Like, well, you're not with them, you're not, next to them, right. But remote teams are great for being able to bring people from different businesses and different areas of the business and from IT to bring them in together in a one virtual room. And I mean, to me, I'm a cameras on kind of dude. So if it's, we're getting on a camera and we're talking things through and we're showing, what's going on the sprint board and the sprint burn down, and we're talking about, how specific tasks need to be done or what's going on or what the business people, it makes it so much easier because you couldn't do that in a boardroom. You couldn't do that in a conference room. You can show different screens rapidly, on a virtual call. And so I think virtual teams and remote get kind of a bad rap because I've been very effective with using them. And it just for these specific reasons is that, you can bring people together, fairly quickly from, you 6 to 8 people, and you don't have to find a conference room and then somebody schedule messed up or someone's late and stuff like that. A lot of that stuff gets solved in a virtual environment.
I completely agree. I think you have to do virtual well, but when you do, it allows you to have much more fluid experiences, right? It's much easier to bring people together and collaborate and such. But I think you need to be disciplined about how you do it. I do want to ask you this though, which is, we talked about Agile, we talked about Scrum, we talked about the Emerging Technologies Committee and how that kind of works across the board. But let's say you're at a smaller credit union that is, let's say, 2 billion, right? With 200 employees, let's say. What are the lessons and learnings that they could take away from how you've operated, and still apply it, right? Because they might not have as much structure and size and scale as you do, but what are the key takeaways that they should walk away with?
Okay, so this is a little controversial, but my view of what Agile is supposed to do is remove process. Is the goal is for it to remove it all together. What I mean by that is if you and I are working together for 10 years, you and I have worked together every day. We know each other's strengths, we know each other's weaknesses, we know exactly how we work. So when a new project comes around, we're already in sync. We can get it done, right? We probably don't need any process at all, right? Our process is us, and I believe that's where Agile is the goal is to remove that process, because when you have process in place, and listen, I'm a process guy, so this could sound crazy. When you have process in place, everyone needs to follow that process. You have more process in the beginning because you may have a team that has never worked together. You may have a team that they don't know each other very well. But as time goes on, you start to talk, and that's again what I love about Agile is that you can decide as a team, well, we don't really need to do this anymore because we already understand, each other. We don't have to have, a sprint planning and remediation or whatever, because we've already know, what we need to work out, what our strengths and weaknesses are. So, but that comes with time, right? So in a small credit union, you can do the same thing. In fact, it's probably a lot easier because you have the same people that you work with over and over and over again. Smaller credit union may have an IT team of maybe, 5 people, and they're going to work with the business units. They're always working with the business units. So your opportunity to leverage agile methods is easier, better, faster than it would be with a large institution, which has to teach everybody, and they have to overcome, cultural things, and they have to teach, and then there's so many different areas and businesses, and everybody's got to work, get to a point where they're familiar with everybody, which is, by the way, it works. It does work. But a smaller credit union can leverage that a lot quicker by starting off with those agile methodologies, and then in time, as they get better using methodology, mindset, and metrics, they're able to be more loose with that because they're used to each other. They know each other. So really, it's an advantage for credit unions to, use their agile methodologies.
I think for your firm, maybe we should talk about this, but I'm curious, which ideas do you run with internally, in the sense that you leverage your internal engineering team to go and take X technology and apply it, for the business outcomes that you need, versus where do you partner selectively with partners to help do implementation or deployment or carry something forward. I do want to talk about from your perspective and lens, but I do want to also ask you, how would a smaller credit union, because the challenge is, the asks of them are the same as they are of you in some ways, right? Like at Lake Michigan, in the sense that they also need to adopt this technology. But if you only have a team of 5 technologists, life is materially more complex, because it's like, how do you as a team of 5 go and adopt and absorb all of this? But I'm very curious, how does a firm your size and scale do this today, and why have you set it up that way?
So again, I think there's a lot of similarities there because when in where smaller credit unions have some advantages, but this should be consistent across the board. Choose your technology and be consistent with it. So if you are a C-sharp shop, your vendors or your partners should be C-sharp developers. They should be C-sharp people. In their APIs should be C-sharp. You want to try to keep that consistent technology across the board. If you're a Cisco shop, then try to keep that technology consistent across the board. And your partner should be somebody from a Cisco organization, Extreme Networks, whoever it may be. And those partners have to be familiar with your strategy. They have to know where you're going, what you're trying to do, and it's important for them to be able to be aligned with that. And I used to not be a big fan of that, because I always thought, these guys are going to dig themselves in like a tick, and then I'm not going to be able to get rid of them. But if you find a partner you can trust, you have designed your infrastructure or your IT organization in a way that you can pivot if you need to, then you can find some good partners that will align with you. And I think that's important. Now, if you're in, again, small credit union, large credit union, and you're picking different technologies and different partners to put your implementations in, that's going to turn into a disaster. So you bring in a partner that is putting in switches, for example, and you bring another one that's putting in firewalls. If they're not aligned on what's going on with your strategy and technology, you're not going to have a reliable platform, because how do these devices interact with each other? I'm not saying that different brand names can't interact with each other, but how is it designed so that they work together? If you have 2 different partners that are just coming in, at different times, just throwing their stuff in, you're really asking for trouble. All right, you're asking for a lot of trouble with that. And same thing on the development side. You're bringing in, a partner that with a different programming language or platform that they use, and they say to you, well, we write things in Java, but we know you're a C sharp. Don't worry, they're too much alike, not a big deal. Well, then you don't want to use that partner anymore, because maybe you had some difficulties with them. You don't have a team that knows Java. You're either people are learning Java or you're hiring people in Java. It turns into an inconsistent mess. So small credit unions, large credit unions, you have to have a consistent strategic plan in your technology and how it gets designed and how it gets set up.
What are the common use cases you're seeing bubble up as great candidates for agentic AI, right? So it's a common theme that we hear, a common topic, which is, what are the use cases that I should work on? From your internal workings, what are those use cases that have started to pop up?
That's what's so great about the Center of Excellence, because they're going in and mapping these processes. And I could tell you, if this was 15 years ago, we were looking at processes and the pain points in those processes and saying, hey, can we automate that? Right. And your automation is, at that time, is generally rules based, and that was great. I mean, if it was, you knew the variables, you knew, of these 5 different variables, which thing was going to get picked, and it automated someone's job, great. That worked great. The tricky thing comes when you hit fuzzy logic, right? Where the decision isn't one of these 5, but there could be a combination of the 2 or a combination of those 5. And now your choices are so myriad that you need a human to be able to discern that? Or how do you channel emails to somewhere? Or how do we, update, a spreadsheet based on, decisions that aren't easily set about in rules or specific guidance. And so, that evolution of that within these processes has really led us to where we put this in place. So, same thing as always, we're defining these processes, we're doing the business process flows, and there's great tools out there that help you do it very quickly. AI helps you do it quickly, but it's determining those pain points and what you do with those pain points where that's where the magic happens, right? So we've taken processes where, there was 50 steps in the processes and brought it down to 6 because we were able to leverage AI in a lot of these use cases where there was humans that had to be in there. So, for example, our HUMDA process. Our HUMDA process, I think that we brought that from I have to say 150 steps down to 15 because a lot of that was human interaction, human things that had to be done, right? And when I saw the results of our lady Beth Baird, who runs our Center of Excellence, I was blown away. I mean, I was just blown away, and it almost brought a tear to my eye because this is a dream come true, right? How many times can you take a 100-step process and take it down to something like 10, and utilizing the power of either agentic AI or automation in order to solve these issues. So it's, and again, we're careful about this. We're not just rolling it out and saying, okay, we're good. We're very intentional in making sure that what we're doing is going to be successful by, we have to babysit it for a while. This is new technology, so.
Yep. In terms of the functional areas, though, is it lending? Is it member experience? Is it member support? Is it onboarding and account opening? I'm curious where are you seeing the activity today?
So the areas that we're focusing on right now, quite a few different areas, and that is, mortgage and lending. We're looking at a lot of the processes there. Our call center processes, that is going to give us huge benefits. That's been sort of big, even in the automation world, in a lot of cost savings, and then fraud. Fraud is another big thing. We've got some automations in fraud. We're looking to see how we can utilize agentic AI in that. We're talking to partners, and we're also talking to our main partner, UiPath, in order to leverage, that kind of thing. In terms of our, auditing, we're looking at options for that through some of our onboarding of clients and doing audit to how can we leverage agentic AI in that. So we've got a couple coals in the fire as to how we're going to implement that, and we've got great partners like UiPath and our Greenlight Consulting is helping us to really dissect what's going to give us a good ROI, and not just saving labor hours, but just even return on money that we can save from leveraging the technology. And that's my big thing, Ankur. I mean, I see so many people out there who are getting burned by how much money they're having to utilize using AI because their LLMs are, churning tokens and, utilizing, a lot of energy and electricity and and you're seeing these big bills come in. I've been very, very diligent about keeping an eye on that, because because the goal is to have a return, right, on our investment.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's cool and AI can do some great stuff, but if it costs, what's that cost benefit? Because if it's too much money in order to get that, then we got to think of something else. And yeah, it's great. AI is taking care of this, but it's costing us, we're not getting a return on that investment because it's costing us more to use the AI than maybe there's another solution out there that, we could put in place. So it's not just, looking at the shiny toy, but making good decisions on any of these things that we think about and how we implement our new technology.
Yeah, ROI I think is the very common topic that pops up, but then it's always hard to assess. And But you have to, because in these decisions, even before you make the technology decision and such, I think you need to understand that business use case and how much value there could be based on the cost of the AI that you work on and deploy and integrate, and then the token expense and such. But it's a
Yeah,
really good call out.
well, I have a CEO who used to be a CFO,
Hmm.
and so I make fun of her, Julie Leonard, because I say, I don't know who I'm talking to. Who am I talking to? Am I talking to CEO Julie or CFO Julie? Because I know when CFO Julie is coming out, she's asking the hard questions about, hey, how are we, how are we saving money, or getting that ROI in the investment? And it's a common topic, and it's really shaped the way that I think about things and how we actually present things to her. I mean, our dashboards are, we're building dashboards that are going to be focused on that ROI, and we're building them right now. And next month we're going to be showing her exactly how that ROI fits.
Let's talk a little bit about RPA versus agentic AI. I mean, you mentioned UiPath as a partner. I'm just curious if you could give us a concrete example where you have a process or you've identified a process, and perhaps it already has some degree of RPA there already. How do you choose whether to invest more in RPA or use RPA if it's a newer process, or whether you should make a bigger bet on things like agentic AI, right? Do you have a concrete example? Maybe you could just walk us through how you approached it, decisions you made, and why.
I think the big one is, yeah, I think the big one is just the one I just talked about, the HUMDA one, because that's the one that, we're actually executing on right now. And, some of the documentation that has to be reviewed, as part of the process. And sometimes we look at it and we think, oh, this is agentic AI. We got to put that in place. But then you have to step back and think, okay, are we doing that because we're just coming up with the easy answer? Or did we really do our due diligence and say, okay, we don't really have to, put, another agentic AI, license in place in order to deal with this, when we know that there is a set number of variables here. And yeah, we may have to cascade them, in order to get to what we do, to our final solution, but it saves us money. We have a lot more visibility in that decision making, and it's just as fast. So I would say those were areas in which we were making decisions on what's the best approach. I mean, it's something we always do, always do.
I think it's one of the trickier transitions because we come across companies, for example, where they have a team of engineers that are bought into RPA, let's say. We also have the flip side, which is maybe they had a bad experience with RPA. But either way, their prior experience with RPA frames whether they want to use more of it or not, and so then that really shapes whether they um, in how they use newer technology like agentic AI. Some are deeply skeptical. Some are saying RP is so bad that they only want to use agentic AI.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be very important to know what tools are available, when should you use what, right? In addition to picking the right use case and getting the ROI assessment, right?
Yeah.
Is also picking out like what in your toolkit do you use and deploy, and how do you do it,
Yeah.
so you get the best possible outcome.
And I think there's complexity involved too, because if you're using RPA and it becomes really overly complex and you can't keep control over what's happening with that automation, then that probably is a good candidate to utilize agentic AI, in that particular instance. And so I think there's a complexity, approach you have to look at too when you're diagnosing how you're going to design it.
Chris, I'm curious about the human side of the tech adoption, though. One of the big challenges we see is like leadership teams want people using more AI. That's like a common theme that comes across. Um, in some ways, like I think the whole token maxing phenomenon that we've seen, which is the mandate from in the higher ups is use more tokens, burn more tokens, because we
Yeah.
see that as a positive signal for how much the rest of the staff is adopting AI.
Yeah. What?
People have
Spend more
debated
money?
that.
Is that what you're saying? Spend more money on those tokens, right?
Yeah. Because they're using it as a proxy or signal as to whether the organization at large is using AI, right? It's a crude proxy, but that's sort of how they do it. Um, and that's lead to sometimes imprudent behavior from like the rest of the staff, where they're just burning tokens because they want to top the leaderboard and such. But I think maybe the bigger question I have for you is, leadership typically wants more AI adoption, and if you look at the staff, the employees that work, they're confused sometimes as to, like, there's so much for them to learn. How do they upskill themselves? How do they get access and exposure? How do they carve out enough time? So I'm curious what you've learned and what you've started to do to make sure the company as a whole approaches and adopts AI in the way that you'd want them to.
So we have had and still doing AI boot camps. We do lunch and learns. We're giving staff, tools such as Copilot licenses to use. We measure whether that investment in AI is actually translating to real productivity gains by the data that we're getting from, let's say, Copilot, for example. There's a dashboard that gives us information. We do some of our own metrics in terms of comparison of productivity compared to previous times, especially through our Scrum teams, because I've always said that you have to have three components to have agile team. You have to have methodology, mindset, and metrics, and those metrics are what we use that help us determine how effective anything that we're doing in terms of new process or new technology is helping us. So having that data is pretty crucial. We are also adopting data governance abilities to identify processes that use AI and track labor hours saved, as well as ability to capitalize on reversing those opportunity costs and turn them into more comparative advantage. So it's met a lot of stuff that we're doing in order to make sure that we're getting the data necessary to know that AI is being used effectively.
Yeah, I think deliberate programming, like the boot camps and such, are a mainstay. I think more companies should do the boot camps and lunch and learns and make sure people have access to the tools and know how to use the tools. And then, of course, you want to measure that
Yeah.
adoption as well. Like who are the champions, who are the laggards potentially that might need more one-on-one
And, and we
help,
and we
right?
Yeah, and we do surveys too to get feedback. Sometimes even just going and asking people. I'll ask people how they're using AI, how effective it is. We're very intentional about this, Ankur. I mean, for me, I don't want to mess this up because I read too many times where it does get messed up. And I know there's exception. Listen, I'm excited too. I think it's fantastic, and I can sometimes even get carried away with this new technology and the potential it has. But at the same time, we just have to make sure this is such a over the top part of our lives now that we need to be able to make sure that this is a Star Trek approach to AI and not a Terminator approach to AI.
One of the big worries right now is that AI is effective, let's assume, and it starts taking away tasks at first, and then parts of people's roles, and maybe you don't need to hire as much for certain roles, and so the job displacement, maybe it's task displacement, but maybe eventually job displacement or some job impact, certainly. And how do you handle that? It's a very sensitive topic that we've seen come up a lot, and I'm curious how you're working your way through it.
So one of the things when I first started at LMCU, and we started talking about AI, I said we really need to talk about this from a philosophical standpoint before we even do anything. What's our philosophy here? What do we want people to believe? as we start this journey. And what we came down to is we want people to adopt AI and to feel safe that it's something they can use as a partner and that it's not going to overtake their lives. We don't want it to do that. At the same time, there are going to be people who are anti AI, they're anti technology, and there are going to be people who just don't want to do it.
Hmm. Hmm.
You know,
Chris, I absolutely love these insights, and I personally look forward to following Lake Michigan very closely on your journey. So thanks for sharing all of this with us.